Welcome to part 2. In this tutorial, we'll look at how to go about texturing different types of leaves or foliage, starting with just the fern here and how to get something that's just one-sided fern and how to create something that looks like this with the amount of detail. And then we'll talk about a modeled leaf, which is this leaf down here, and how to deal with a modeled leaf. So with that being said, let's just jump into it and see how we texture foliage in Arnold5. Alright, so we're back. The lights look pretty good now that I've brought in the actual geometry, and the next step is basically to start texturing. This would be a good time to actually apply the displacement and bump before we get color into this. Why? Well, a simple reason is that if we get the detail in when we have a nice white object that doesn't have any clipping or anything to it, it will be a lot easier to see the detail that we need to see. So that's what we're going to spend our time on first, is to get the detail, the bump detail first, and then we can apply other things to it. So I'm going to just go to this object here because these two leaves basically have the same texture to them, and then I'll go into the AI, basically the texture node kind of thing, the shading group node. And under the shading group where it says displacement, I'm just going to pipe in a displacement map. So I already have a setup for this. I choose my displacement map, and by default you can see it looks pretty nifty, but I want to control it a little more and control how much detail is coming in. So to do that, fairly simple, I am going to go up one like that, and what I wanted to do, oh yeah, okay, so I want to choose the actual object, and then I want to go into its shape node and into Arnold, and in Arnold you want to scroll down to where it says subdivision, and you want to choose the subdivision method, which is cat mill is probably the best one, and currently it's just divided by 1, so I'm going to go 2 and I'm getting more detail in there. So I think 2 should be enough, and you could actually see that here I'm getting some weird cutting over there, but once I apply a mask to it, I think it should be fine, because it's kind of problematic. I think it's a bit too strong, so we're going to go back to the leaf and back again, and here and back again, and we should be now over here. So before I change the scale, we can say how high, the maximum height that this can get to. So if I go 0.1, see it's going to kind of clamp it, or if I go 5, it's going to clamp it some more, and so on. So I'd like to put in 1 at default, and then over here the 0 amount to about 0.1, and again this will kind of balance the actual amount that it can go, how far it could go out. Let's do that, and you can see I'm kind of clamping it down. There's not much difference, but you will see it get there slowly. I still think it's a bit strong, so let's knock it down by quite a bit. Now that's too much. It's about 0.5. I think that's a bit better. So I'm getting what I more or less expected from it. Getting that data, that detail right there. Alright, cool. That's sorted. I'm not going to do the bump just yet because we need a two-sided, and for two-sided we need a bump map. So I'm just going to leave it as is. Let's move on to these leaves because they also have a displacement, as far as I recall. Very bad thing I did here is not name this, but we can take care of that later. Alright, let's add its bump file. So this is my fern. Whoops. I have to click there. Rocks. I should have a displacement map. There we go. So I should now see some detail. You can see a little bit of detail. All this will be cut away later. Actually, we probably could do that now, but let's take it a step at a time. Alright, so now that we have this, there, I'm going to go to the shape node, and you want to go down to the displacement, to subdivision, Calvin Clark, and we are going to subdivide this twice. You'll see they're already getting a little more data in there. And we can go back here, and back there, and here, and back one, and let's say it's a bit harsh, so let's make that 0.5, and 1, and that's just something I do every time, and then I play around with these here just to refine it later. Alright, so more or less we got our displacement done. Probably could do that for the table as well. But I'm going to stop here because I said I'll do the leaves first. Next thing I want to work on is basically the masking. So we're going to do some masking on this leaf, and we'll do that in the next lesson. Alright, so in the previous lesson we looked at how to create displacement. Now we're going to look at how to create a mask. So in this case, I'm going to start off with the fern, and the reason is that these leaves have got two-sided, and it's a totally different workflow. But here we have a one-sided option, so we're going to have to apply some coercion. And what we're going to do is basically clip this this geometry by working on the shader. Alright, so the first thing you want to do, especially when you come to anything that has like a opaque, so it's transparent in any way, you want to go to the shape node, and you want to go to the Arnold, and just where it says opaque here, just turn it off. By default it's on. Now why you want to do that is because I want to tell Maya to say, hey, wherever I put a mask, cut that away. Alright, so then I'm going to go down to geometry, and you'll see where it says opacity. We're just going to plug in a texture there. So I should have a opaque mask somewhere that I've made for this. There we go. And apply it. That actually should get its own material. So let's give that its own material. There we go. And so can the stones get its own material? Let me just do that quickly. Okay. I think that's because I'm in lighting and not shading. There we go. So now I'm in shading, so now things are shaded, and you can see that I've cut up the ferns, just leaving the leaves. And that's basically what I'm aiming to do. Alright, cool. Now, we can proceed. Now, if I do it this way, the cool thing is that what I've done is told Maya here in the geometry, make sure that anything that gets this mask is invalid. That means anything that has specular or bump or anything is going to be cut out from this opacity map here. I am going to go to the bump map here, and because I'm already here, I'm going to apply its bump as well. So I think I got a normal map here. I got a bump map that I could use, and I should have a normal map. There we go. Yeah, so I got a normal map. Alright, and normal maps you should always change to raw in your color space. We'll just give that extra detail and work better. So now you can actually see that we got a little more detail coming in there. And there we go. That's pretty cool. We've moved on. Alright, so now that we have this detail, and you can see that I'm getting a nice shadows and nice shading. Not so happy with what's going on here, but we can fix that later. This object, yeah. Still getting a interesting thing happening there. So I'm just gonna open that, check that. Yeah, no, I don't know why that's getting information on it. It shouldn't. All right, we'll get into shading in a minute. So right now, all we've done is made our displacement maps and bump maps. In the next video, we will now start going into the shading mode and start shading most of the stuff. From the specular highlights to how we get some light to come through an object. So with that being said, in the next lesson, we will start off with the fern and shade it by just plugging in all of its textures. But when we get to the subsurface, that's when we'll start and talk more about the subsurface scatter. All right. Here we are after creating the displacement and the alpha mask, and the next step is basically to create the subsurface. Again, we're doing all of this before we add actual textures, because it gets a lot easier to do it this way than to actually add the textures and start trying to see what we need to see through that. So let's apply the subsurface. So it's fairly simple. I'm just going to choose my shader, and because I'm working on a thin object, basically it's just a couple of planes, in my geometry tab I'm going to press this thin world tab. So what is that going to do? Thin world. What that's going to do is basically start calculating, though, if this was a sheet of paper or a thin object, which a leaf is in this case, which will give us more the ability to control how light scatters through the object. I'm going to take a picture of that so we can see the difference later. Alright, let's get to the subsurface, and right now it's not on, so let's turn it on, and I'm just going to scale that all the way up and turn on the weight, and it's basically turned on the subsurface. So I'm going to let this run for a second. Okay, it's done. I'm going to take a picture of that. Now over here in my render view, I'm going to right click and go and say set this to A, so this is going to be my first stop, and then set this one to B. So this side is A, this side is B, and you can see the difference. You can see that now the light is being absorbed, and we're getting a much better result, and we can see the difference between the different leaves. There you go. Alright, cool. So now we know that we have a subsurface. So what's actually going on? Well, firstly we got the weight, and the weight is basically going to control, if I turn this off, it's going to control how much of the light is actually being absorbed and how much is being reflected. Right now I'm having all the light absorbed, and that's why some of these leaves are being turned dark, because no light is being reflected from them. They're just absorbing all the light. Now the subsurface color is basically the color that is going to be emitted, the wavelength that's going to be sent back to our eyes. And currently it's white, but I could make it any color I like, such as green, and I'll get this. So because I'm at 100%, you can see that we're getting just that green coming through. So now if I dial it down to about half, you can see that the white area let's finish. Alright, it's done, so I'm going to take an image. Let's see, the white areas are the reflected color, reflected surface, and the green is the absorbed light. So if I now make this one A and make this one B, you can see the difference between the two. You could also see that we're getting some bounce light out of it. Alright, so radius is turned off and scale is turned off, and the reason is that we've pressed this thin wall. So if I turn that off and go here, we'll get a different result, mainly because it now thinks it has thickness. It won't look as good. Now, the reason is that the radius basically controls how much something is opaque. So let's say I want this to become opaque. Click here, go to HSV, and just go, let's say, I hate when it does that. HSV 0.5. I will make something more opaque. So things become a little more less saturated. And then the scale will determine how deep the light is being, how deep does the light go before it's being extinguished. There we go, extinguished, or reflected back. Now if we turn on thin walled, you get a different result, mainly because I'm told us that it's pretty thin, and then I control how much light is being absorbed by the weight itself instead of through the scale and through the radius. Type is pretty cool, because type basically what it will do is determine the type of calculation of how the light is being absorbed, and that is pretty useful for when you are trying to control the light itself. So it determines how fast it will calculate something. So random walkthrough, what it will do is, for thin things, it seems to work faster. It calculates it makes calculations faster. At least that's what the document mentions. The doc for Arnold says. Documentation. There, I got it. Anyway, anisotropy is basically it's more about, it's also a depth thing. It's looking at when to start calculating the penetration of light, how far down it goes, which direction it goes from when it hits, like start calculating from a different distance instead of center of object. This is good for like objects that have like thickness, and you want, maybe a certain depth, but to have, from certain angles the light jump out a different way. It also will give you better calculations of high detailed objects that need like little cavities and stuff like that. It's probably better, the type here of the random walkthrough. Anyway, that's basically it. When we come back, we will start texturing with textures, and we'll move into the hypershader to do that. So when we come back, we'll do that. Alright, so here we have our image, and we want to start texturing, so let's do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to this icon, and I'm going to open my hypershader. I am going to dock my render view there. I'm going to lock everything so nothing docks by mistake. I'm going to get rid of my shadable thing here, and we're going to select that so we get our options here. I'm just going to do that, and we are going to just, you select the object you want and pull down, and you'll get your graph, your shading network, and that's what I want. So basically, let's go over the shading network real quick. Let's see if we can do this. Alright, so let's have a look. So I got just a refresh. There we go. Alright, so we got our alpha mask here. We've got our normal map and our displacement map, and that's about it. Now what I'm going to do is start texturing. So the first thing I want to do is just texture, regular texture. So let's just grab base color, and we're going to go to the base color, and we're going to create a file. It's a regular file. I'm going to realign that to the same position, like so. And then we're going to add in my diffuse, which I think is this guy here. Alright. And I'm going to restart the render. And we're going to get this, which is, it's nice getting all the textures, but because I just put a green color, it's kind of making us really vibrant, and I want to control that. So to control that, what I want to do is basically connect this out color into the subsurface color. Alright, cool, but now the subsurface doesn't look very good. Alright, so if I disconnect this color for a sec, make that white again, we can see the subsurface, but it's not as good as it was before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of color correct the color here using a node called a remap node, and there's several different kinds. In this case I want to use an HSV. Actually, I'm just going to close that for now, and that one, there we go. Just because it makes it easier to control this. So we're going to just plug that in there, plug that in there. Now let's say we make it more saturated. I'm actually going to detach. Wait, I'm thinking. Alright, so there's a couple of cool things that we can do. So you can press isolate select, and what you're going to get is this. And then what you can do, it's basically just going to select that node. Alright, so we want to make this a lot brighter. And let's say let's make it blue just so we can see the difference, right? And then if we go here, you can actually see the result. Alright, so we're going to go back here. We don't want to blue, we want to take it towards the yellows maybe. And there you go, we got a little bit of the yellow come through. I think that's kind of what we're looking for. Something a little more like that. It looks much nicer. Alright, let's turn that off and see the result. And yeah, that actually looks alive. It looks breathing. Cool. So now we just used the same texture but used the color correction to fix that. Alright, so let's do the specular bit. And then after that I'm going to stop the lesson here because I'm pretty much it's just plug and play of textures, and I'd rather move on to the double-sided leaf, which is a more interesting problem to deal with. But just to demonstrate, we are going to go here, and I got a specular. I got a roughness and a specular, I think. We got gloss. So this is the glossiness. Opacity, there's a roughness. Let's start off with the gloss. And gloss is more about the highlights. And the roughness, I'll show you where you plug that in. So, yeah, that will be here where it says roughness. We can just stick in that file there. So we're going to go roughness. Alright. Alright, so with that being said, I'm going to end this lesson in how to texture a thin single-sided texture. In the next course, we are going to look at how to do a double-sided leaf and how to deal with its little tiny issues and caveats. See you then. Okay, so in this tutorial or a series of parts that we're going to work on is basically creating a two-sided shading network. Now it's fairly easy, but you just got to get your head around certain things. Alright, so we got our bump maps. All we need to do is decide which side is up and down. You go on the internet, you find or take pictures and model your leaf and make sure that you have both pictures, both images of the back and the front of the leaf, and then make sure that everything fits and sits exactly the way you expect it to. Alright, so with that being said, let's go into our hypershader, and I'm just going to click the little button here to create a new space for working. And do I actually need the multi-list, or let's leave it here for now. Alright, we can't make these smaller and a little more room, or not. Make that smaller. There we go. So I just want a little more room in here. Okay, so here we are, and what I'm going to do is choose the leaf, and I am going to bring in everything that I have for it. I actually have something there I don't need. And I got this texture here, it's called leaf, this AI, and instead of leaf, I'm just going to underscore this and write top. And then I'm going to duplicate the same one. And instead of top one, we're going to call this top. Alright, probably misspelled that, but never mind. So now we got both the top and the bottom, and because we have this shading group, basically I don't need to worry about the displacement. It's still assigned to that geometry. As long as I don't physically assign any of these guys, but just connect here, I'm going to be okay. So let's start off with the top shading group. So top, all I'm going to do is go over here. I'm going to choose my file here. You know what I'm going to do just to make sure that we never lose this? I'm going to press P to pin it, and just pin everything that I want to keep at all times in the scene. So if I ever, by mistake, clear this out, I can get to it pretty quickly. Alright, and let's just go to where I have the textures for my leaf. And I just want my diffuse colors. It's bump map, front, back. My front texture. Alright, so both of them are getting a front texture, which is fine because that's what I want. Now I know that specular wise, this is supposed to be more waxy. Now I could, what I'll start doing first is, see, I'm going to turn on here, you could go and turn on 3D manipulation, and then I'm going to switch to my perspective. Alright, so we just look at this a bit better. Hopefully I'm on my perspective. Alright, so I got this here, and what I want to do is start just manipulating the roughness to make it feel more waxy. Alright, because most leaves are that way. Like the top side is going to be a more waxy type thing. Now what I could do is go over here and assign a texture to that, and that texture should be like the specular map. Should I have one here somewhere? It's front, it's back, it's bump. Here we go. Specular map. Apply, and it pretty much, the one I have kills everything. Which is not exactly what I want. So of course I can control this by putting a remap HSV on it or a value. Either way will work, but we'll just use this. Right now it's connected to the alpha, so we're going to go color and just grab the R. I'm going to isolate select it. So I could also control the contrast between certain areas. So I'm basically clamping it, so I'm getting certain areas to be a little shinier, certain areas to be less. There we go. So now if I look at it, I could see that I'm getting a rougher patch. Alright, so again, now I could just dial down the amount of light, this being the color, and then of course we can up the number here, which is going to just spread it out further or sharpen it, so you see it kind of sharper. We could go to 1.2 again. It's going to make it really smooth, so let's make it 0.3. Yeah, I think that will work, the reflection. You could turn anisotropy and so on. So I think that's pretty good. Now I'll take the next 2 minutes to do the opposite side. So we are going to basically, because it's easy, grab this here and just plug this into the shader network instead. Alright, so we're back to what we had before, but this time I'm going to plug in the back end of this. Put the back end in there. The front, let's put in the back. Alright, and then here the specular should be almost gone. That means we want this absolutely rough and dial that down like that. Alright. The next thing we want to do is just create some alphas. So we're going to create an alpha per side. So over here I'll just plug in the back alpha. I think I should have just one really. There you go, I think it's this guy. Or not. Oh, yeah, of course that's not going to work because we need to go over here and turn on the opacity. Now, my alpha is the wrong way around. So what I can do is go reverse. That should fix it. So if I'll plug that in there and this one into opacity. There we go. And that should be all nice and snug. Alright, I'm going to stop this here, and in the next lesson we're going to see how to make this all work together as one cohesive thing. So let's make it work. What do you say? Alright, so where we left off, we basically created our two basic shaders. I didn't go too much into like the subsurface and stuff like that because it's fairly easy, but what you will do is do it separately for each one, and then we connect it up. But before I do that, what we can do is make this a two shaded deal. So how do we do that? Well, fairly easy. We write AI 2, and we should find a two shaded. I didn't write AI. AI 2. TWO, there you go, two-sided. And we'll make this, and I'm just going to slice it off. And then we're just going to plug in the top. So back to bottom goes to back. Let's just plug this in there. And then this one is going to go in the front. And we should get this. So now, if we swing around, you can see that we got two different objects. Now, I could try, I'm not sure, I haven't tried this ever, but if I create one more shader, let's try this. I'm not sure it's going to work. Not a shader. No, basically this. Now, if I could create a layered shader and then probably use the alpha there, but technically what I need to do is run alphas on both. On both of these. So I'm just going to duplicate that whole system there. Actually, didn't need that. Just color that in there and grab the R, X there into, actually it goes into color. There we go. So now I should have alpha, the same alpha in both. So that's basically it. That's the whole deal. This node doesn't have too much. This is two-sided, and that's it. You can do like composites and stuff like that to get more to it. What I found is that if you want to create something like a subsurface, here too you have to make this on both thin-walled, and then we'll go in and let's say set this to, let's say 0.6, and then here as well to 0.6. That way we get the same amount of light coming through either side. Let's make these both the same settings on both, and now I just need to plug in a texture that is going to be the subsurface, which I do remember I created a specific one for it, so just hold on to your horses for a sec. That's front specular. Alright, so what we can do is basically, there we go, that's the SS. There we go. Alright. So this one now has the subsurface, and I can just use the same one here. So we get the same subsurface color coming through. And that's basically the trick. Of course, we can play around with the scaling and how much goes inside, how much comes through, how much specular. I still think my specular is too sharp on here, on the top. So maybe I'm gonna just scale it down a bit. Yeah. If you want, you could also give it a little bit of transparency. That sometimes helps. This is also a good time to add like a bump map. So I'm in my front. So go to the front. Go here, add my normal front. That's going to give that detail on the front. I'm actually not going to add it to the back because I don't think it's adding anything really. Well, maybe we'll see in a sec. Yeah, normals, always remember to turn it to raw so you get a much better result, because it will read its full dynamic range. Okay, and yeah, then we want to go back here. And I'm going to dial this down by half just because I don't need so much detail. Maybe even more. I'm going to give this tangent space in 1 and see. Alright, I think that's about it. So with that, I am going to conclude this lesson. That is two-sided chaining. It's fairly simple. Let's see, I'm going to just stop that render. Restart it. And in our next lesson, basically what I'm going to do is go over like how to do procedural texturing for the pot itself. If you are interested, please stick around and watch. If not, thank you for watching so far. I think I gave you some good starting points for those of you who are just starting out when it comes to leaves and plants. Everything else is pretty much standard from here on out, but if you're interested in seeing it, I think you might get some good tips. So thank you for watching so far, and see you in the next lesson, which is coming right up.